Day 14. Morning. Kostya woke not to an aching silence, but to a thick, biting cold that had crept into the house overnight. The stove had long gone out, and the air inside was searingly icy, smelling of cooled ash and the frosty, resinous scent of pine needles seeping through cracks in the walls. He didn't open his eyes immediately, lying in his sleeping bag and watching his own breath plume in the semi-darkness like a pale, disembodied ghost. His thoughts flowed lazily, thickly, like sap. 13 days. Only 13 days ago he was sitting in his sterile apartment, listening to the clock tick away the emptiness. Now that emptiness was outside, vast, white, silent, but it wasn't inside him anymore. Inside was crowded with thoughts, images, riddles. The masks in the cellar, the old book. The words about he who is in the roots buzzed in his head like trapped flies. Reluctantly, overcoming the powerful temptation to stay in the warm shell of his sleeping bag, he got out. The cold instantly seized his bare ankles and began deftly crawling up his body. He rubbed his palms, snorting, and began the now familiar ritual lighting the stove. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, a skill earned in 2 weeks of fighting for warmth. Chips, birch bark, a careful flame humming in the stove's belly. He was no longer afraid of the fire. He negotiated with it. And today the fire caught on the first match, as if eager to warm him. While the water in the cast-iron pot boiled, he went to the frost-encrusted window and wiped the glass with his palm, and froze. The great snow had finally subsided. The taiga lay before him in all its dazzling, silent power. White, heavy caps on ancient firs and spruces bent the branches to the ground. The endless sea of taiga stretched to the horizon, rolling with snowy peaks and hollows. The air was so clean and transparent, it seemed he could touch the top of a pine tree on a cliff 2 kilometers away. The sky had cleared to an icy blue, and the weak, low winter sun cast long, sharp shadows on the snow, sprinkling it with myriad diamond sparks. And across this sparkling whiteness, violating the usual oppressive silence, people were moving. Not 2 or 3 silent old people puttering in their yards, but many people. 10, 15, 20. Men, women, even a few children. They walked unhurriedly but purposefully, all in one direction deeper into the village, toward the oldest, blackened house, with a huge, once carved, now almost rotten ridgepole on its roof. They carried birch bark containers, clay jugs, bundles wrapped in rough cloth. Their faces were focused, but not grim. On the contrary, their movements held an unusual lightness, even animation. And a hum carried through the air, not loud but dense, saturated. A hum of muffled voices merging into a single stream, occasionally interrupted by the clear, ringing laughter of a child and the measured, deep chime as if polished stones or wooden clappers were striking together. Kostya's eyes widened in disbelief. This was so unlike the deathly, suspicious village he had known all these days. This was alive. I was looking for something real, flashed through his mind with piercing clarity. Here it is. It's not just in the silence and cold. It's in this. He remembered his old view from the window, concrete boxes, billboards, people forever running somewhere. The hustle that he thought was life. Now that life seemed like a fake, cardboard set. And this was the real play, performed according to some ancient, unknown laws. The aroma of brewing tea snapped him out of his stupor. He poured himself a mug, clenched it in his palms, feeling the heat penetrate his frozen fingers. He drank his tea, unable to tear his eyes from the window, watching as the last of the residents disappeared into the doorway of that distant house. Silence gradually returned to the street, but now it was different. saturated with the echo of recently faded footsteps and voices, ringing with expectation. He finished his tea. His hand trembled slightly, but no longer from the cold. Questions burned inside him, outweighing caution. This was stronger than him. Stronger than the fear of seeming like an outsider, of violating unknown rules. He pushed the mug away sharply. His movements were decisive, almost impetuous. He pulled on his quilted jacket, hat, fur mittens not for long work, but as armor before stepping into a new, unexplored world. He wouldn't sit by the window like a ghost, observing life from the sidelines. He had come here for something real. And here it was, happening right now, outside his door. Kostya swung open the heavy oak door, and the bright winter light hit his face. The frosty air burned his lungs. He took a step onto the porch, then another onto the packed path leading to the street. He walked toward the hum of voices, toward the tracks in the fresh snow, toward the mystery that had finally shown him its living face. He was no longer a runaway. He was a seeker. And he was going to find out what was happening in his village. Kostya stepped outside and was immediately enveloped by a sense of change. The air was festively thick, smelling of stove smoke and something Swedish, spicy, perhaps mead or a herbal infusion. And although there was no bright light, only dim glows from windows and the pale light of the moon on the snow, the village seemed alive. And the signs. He'd noticed them before, but now they stood out everywhere, as if emerging from the darkness. Not glowing, but seeming deeper, more expressive in this nocturnal half-light. The carved spirals on the window frames, the interwoven branches with an eye in the center on the gates, the strange zigzags on the shutters. All of it now seemed not just decoration, but an important part of what was happening. An ancient language the village had suddenly begun to speak. He was led by sound. Quiet but persistent music, a rhythmic tapping of wooden sticks, the muffled strumming of strings from something like gusli, but more primitive, and the thin, whistling melody of a pipe. The sound came from somewhere in the center of the village. Kostya walked, peering into the shadows, and suddenly stopped. He hadn't noticed this building before. It stood at the very end of the street, partially hidden by sprawling fir trees. A long, low house made of massive, time-blackened logs, more like a temple or a communal house. And its walls, from foundation to roof, were completely covered in carvings. The same symbols as on the houses, but here they were larger, more complex, intertwining into intricate patterns, telling some unknown story. Around this building, illuminated by glimpses from the wide open door, crowds of people gathered. All the residents of Omut. They stood in small groups, talking quietly, some swaying to the music, a couple of elderly women dancing smoothly with each other, almost without moving from the spot. Their faces were animated, smiling, but without rowdy merriment. This was a deep, calm, internal joy. Kostya saw the familiar old woman who had once run from him at the well. Now she was sitting on a snow-covered log pile near the entrance to the large building, wrapped in a shawl, watching the proceedings with a quiet, approving expression. Determination flared in him again. He approached, trying to appear calm. "Hello," he began. "Excuse me for interrupting. Can you tell me what holiday this is? It's all very beautiful." The old woman slowly turned her gaze to him. Her eyes were clear and calm. "Holiday," she repeated, and a light, kind chuckle sounded in her voice. "What holiday, dear? It's just such a day. The old and the young have gathered to warm up and listen. Winter business." She paused, studying his face. "You shouldn't be catching a chill out here, my dear. Go on home, get some sleep. The frost is getting stronger. You've had your stroll." Her words were soft, even caring, but they held an impenetrable firmness. It wasn't a rude refusal, but rather a polite, brook no argument indication of his place. Here and now, he was superfluous. Nodding, Kostya retreated. He stood for a while longer on the edge, watching the people communicate, move in time to the music, absolutely ignoring his presence. Then he turned and trudged back to his izba. Entering inside, he didn't turn on the light. He went to the window, moved the edge of the curtain aside. From here, the music was almost inaudible, only the muffled hum of voices sometimes carried on gusts of wind. The shadows of people moved in the glows from the main house. He stood and watched, feeling like a boy with his nose pressed to the window of a candy store, behind which something magical and inaccessible was happening. Weariness, cold, and the bitterness of alienation slowly overwhelmed him. Without even making it to the bed, he sank to the floor by the window, leaned his back against the cold logs, and fell into a heavy, restless sleep full of images of silent dances, stern carved faces, and quiet, mysterious smiles.